They didn't call it selling. In her house, they called it ending a burden. The night it happened, there was no screaming, no dramatic farewell. Just silence thick enough to choke on. The kind of silence that only exists in homes where hope has already died. She sat on the edge of a narrow bed, hands folded in her lap, staring at the floor as her parents spoke in low voices behind a closed door. She had learned years ago not to listen too closely. Listening only made things hurt more. Still, certain words cut through no matter how hard she tried not to hear them. Barren. Useless. No future. The word daughter was never used. In her world, a woman's worth was measured by what she could continue, bloodlines, names, honor. And when the doctors said she could never have children, the verdict was final. She wasn't broken. She was erased. Debts followed soon after. Quiet loans. Desperate promises. Men who came to the house and never removed their shoes. Men who didn't look at her face, only at her like inventory. And then one night, a different kind of man arrived. No shouting. No threats. Just a black car outside that didn't belong to the neighborhood. The engine never turned off. The windows were tinted so dark they swallowed the streetlight. Her father wouldn't meet her eyes when he told her to pack. "Where am I going?" she asked. He didn't answer. Her mother adjusted her scarf with shaking hands, as if tidying her up might soften what was about to happen. There were no hugs. No tears. Just relief hiding behind forced calm. When the car door opened, she understood something then. This wasn't an escape. It was a transaction. The drive felt endless. The city changed around her. Narrow streets gave way to wide roads. Noise disappeared. The air grew heavier, quieter, like the world itself was holding its breath. When they finally stopped, she looked up at iron gates taller than anything she'd ever seen. Cameras tracked the car. Armed men stood like statues, faces unreadable. No insignias. No names. Power doesn't need labels. Inside the estate, everything was immaculate. Marble floors, warm lights, the faint smell of expensive tobacco. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a headquarters. She was led through long corridors without explanation. No one spoke to her directly. Instructions were passed around her, not to her. Take her upstairs. Make sure she understands the rules. Don't let her wander. Rules, but no reasons. In a room that was too large to feel comforting, she waited. Alone. The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded louder than a gunshot. That's when fear truly arrived. Not panic. Not hysteria. Fear that settles deep, quiet, patient. Minutes passed. Or hours. Time meant nothing here. Then the door opened again. He didn't enter immediately. She felt him before she saw him. The shift in the room, the way the air seemed to tighten. When he stepped inside, he didn't rush. He didn't stare. He observed. An older man. Hardened features. Calm eyes that had seen too much and survived it all. He wore no uniform of power, no flashy jewelry, no obvious symbols. He didn't need them. This was the kind of man others spoke about in whispers. He studied her like one studies a chessboard, not the pieces but the outcome. "You know why you're here?" he asked. She swallowed. No. The pause. Long enough to make her pulse betray her. "Good," he said. "Then you won't lie." She waited for him to explain. He didn't. Instead, he circled slowly, not touching her, not invading her space, but somehow controlling it completely. "They told me you were unwanted," he continued. "Discarded. A mistake." Her hands trembled. She said nothing. "They also told me you were obedient." That word landed heavier than any insult she'd ever heard. Finally, she found the courage to ask, "What do you want from me?" He stopped. For the first time, he looked directly at her, not with desire, not with cruelty, but with intention. "I don't buy broken things," he said calmly. "I buy necessary ones." Her breath caught. Necessary for what? He turned toward the door as if the conversation were already over. "You'll stay," he added. "You'll be protected. And you'll follow every instruction given to you." She nodded instinctively. Just before leaving, he paused again. "Oh, and understand this," he said without looking back. You weren't brought here because no one wanted you. The door opened. You were brought here because everyone else was too afraid to. The lock clicked shut. Alone again, her heart racing, she finally realized the truth. She hadn't been sold into a life. She had been delivered into a legacy she didn't yet understand. And whatever this man truly wanted from her, it wasn't something that would ever let her go. Silence was the first rule of the house. She learned it quickly. Not because someone explained it, but because the walls themselves seemed to listen. Every hallway swallowed sound. Every door closed without echo. Even footsteps felt restrained, as if the building punished noise. This was not a home. This was an empire trained to breathe quietly. She was given clothes the next morning. Elegant. Expensive. Chosen by someone who had never asked her taste. A woman dressed her without speaking, eyes lowered, movements precise. When she tried to ask a question, the woman froze. Then, softly, "Please don't ask things here." That was the second rule. She was shown the estate in fragments, never the whole thing at once. Rooms of meetings she wasn't allowed to enter. Corridors that turned away before revealing where they led. Windows that looked out over land so vast it didn't feel owned, it felt conquered. Men stood everywhere. Not guards, enforcers. Their eyes followed her, not with desire, but with calculation. As if they were memorizing her face for future instructions. By afternoon, she realized something chilling. Everyone here knew who she was. And none of them knew why. That uncertainty made her dangerous. At dinner, she was seated alone at the long table. Plates arrived, untouched by human hands. No servant stayed in the room. No conversation filled the space. Only one chair at the far end remained empty. When he finally entered, the room shifted again, subtle, but undeniable. Men straightened. The air tightened. Conversations in distant rooms seemed to die instantly. The Underworld boss took his seat without looking at her. He began eating. She didn't move. Minutes passed. The sound of cutlery against porcelain felt deafening. "Eat," he said calmly, still not looking up. She obeyed. That was the third rule. After the meal, he spoke, not to her, but to the room. "Bring them in." The doors opened. Four figures entered one by one. His children. They were older than she expected. Not children at all, heirs. Each carried a different presence. A different weight. The eldest son walked with controlled confidence, eyes sharp, posture disciplined. Power sat on him comfortably. The second, quieter, observant, calculating. The kind who speaks little and remembers everything. The third wore a faint smile that never reached the eyes. Dangerous. Unpredictable. And the youngest, stillness wrapped in arrogance. Watching her like a problem that needed solving. No introductions were made. She understood then, names were privileges here. "This is the woman," the boss said simply. Nothing more. No explanation. No justification. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken threat. She felt it instantly, the shift in the room. The way interest sharpened into suspicion. The way curiosity hardened into resentment. She didn't need words to understand what she represented. A change. Later that night, one of the house elders approached her quietly. "You should know something," the man said, voice barely audible. "This house does not tolerate unpredictability." She nodded. "And you," he continued, "are unpredictable." She asked the question she had been holding back since arriving. "Why did he choose me?" The elder hesitated. That alone was terrifying. "He has 4 children," the man said finally. "For alliances. For bloodlines. For problems." Her chest tightened. "And you," she whispered. The man met her eyes for the first time. "You are not tied to any of them." That night, she couldn't sleep. From her room, she heard quiet arguments through thick walls. Doors opening. Doors closing. The sound of someone throwing a glass hard enough to shatter, but not loud enough to be punished. This empire didn't fear outsiders. It feared itself. The next day, protection increased. Men followed her openly now. She wasn't allowed beyond certain areas. Her movements were logged. Her presence announced before she entered rooms. Being protected here meant being watched. By evening, rumors reached her without words, through glances, pauses, tightened jaws. Some believed she was a replacement. Others believed she was bait. And some believed she was a test. Then came the moment that confirmed her fear. As she walked the east corridor, a servant dropped a tray near her feet. Too close. Too careless. A guard reacted instantly, grabbing the servant, dragging him away. Later, she learned the tray held food meant for her. It had been poisoned. The Underworld boss stood in her doorway that night. For the first time, he said calmly, they've made a move. She stared at him, trembling. Why? She asked. I've done nothing. He stepped closer. That, he said, voice low, is exactly the problem. He turned to leave. Rest, he added. From tonight on, silence won't protect you. The door closed. And she finally understood. She was no longer just unwanted. She was a threat inside an empire built on blood, secrecy, and fear. And the war had already begun. Protection changed everything. After the poison tray, nothing in the house moved the same way. Men no longer pretended not to follow her. Their footsteps echoed behind hers, measured, deliberate. Doors that were once merely closed were now locked. Routes were changed without explanation. Safety, she learned, was not freedom. It was a cage lined with gold. Whispers followed her through the halls, not spoken aloud, but exchanged through glances. Conversations stopped when she entered rooms. Loyalty here wasn't emotional, it was strategic. And strategy had already turned against her. By the third day, she noticed the pattern. Every time the Underworld boss acknowledged her presence, stood beside her, spoke to her, allowed her to walk near him, someone else paid the price. A guard reassigned. A servant dismissed. A meeting postponed. Her existence disrupted balance. That was when the gifts began to arrive. Jewelry left on her dresser without notes. Dresses tailored perfectly, as if someone had studied her body for weeks. Protection disguised as generosity. But gifts in this house were never gifts. They were signals. One afternoon, she was escorted into a smaller dining room, private, soundproof. The boss sat alone, reviewing documents. He didn't look up when she entered. Sit, he said. She obeyed. You've noticed the change, he continued. Yes. That's good, he replied calmly. Awareness keeps people alive. She gathered her courage. They think I'm important. He finally looked at her. They think you're dangerous. The words sent a chill through her spine. Why? She asked. I have no power here. He leaned back slowly. Power doesn't always come from action, he said. Sometimes it comes from position. He stood and walked toward the window, hands clasped behind his back. I built this empire by controlling outcomes, he continued. But outcomes depend on variables. She waited. You, he said, turning slightly, are an unplanned variable. That night, the first message arrived. Not a threat. Not a warning. A question. How long do you think you'll last? It was left on her mirror in neat handwriting. The second message came the following morning, scratched into the underside of her chair at breakfast. You don't belong to him. By the third, she stopped pretending these were coincidences. Someone was testing her. The boss increased her security again. Now, 2 men followed her at all times. Their presence was intimidating, but it made something clear. Whoever wanted her gone was powerful enough not to fear consequences. The attack came without noise. She was walking the inner garden when the air shifted, subtle, instinctive. One of the guards reacted too late. A shadow moved between the trees. A blade flashed. The guard fell. Gunfire erupted. Silence shattered. She was dragged to the ground, covered, shielded by bodies trained to die for someone else. When it was over, the attacker was gone. No body. No trace. Only blood on marble. That night, the Underworld boss didn't speak to her gently. You're no longer invisible, he said flatly. And you're no longer neutral. Her voice shook. I never asked for this. No one does, he replied. That's why it works. She realized then, this wasn't about affection or even control. It was about declaration. By choosing her, he had drawn a line through the empire. And now everyone was being forced to pick a side. The children began to reveal themselves. The eldest watched her closely, assessing, calculating. The second avoided her completely. The third smiled too often. And the youngest stared at her like a verdict waiting to be delivered. One evening, the youngest approached her alone. "You're a symbol," he said casually. "A symbol of what?" she asked. He tilted his head. "Change," he replied. "And change makes people desperate." "Do you want me gone?" she asked quietly. He smiled. "I want to know why he chose you." The question echoed long after he left. That night she confronted the boss. "You could have chosen anyone," she said. "Why me?" For the first time, hesitation crossed his face. "Because," he said slowly, "you come without history." She frowned. "No alliances. No debts. No bloodline demanding loyalty." He stepped closer. "You don't belong to this world," he said. "Which makes you immune to it." Her heart pounded. "And what does that make me?" He looked at her the way generals look at maps. "A future," he said. That was when she understood the price. Being chosen didn't mean being valued. It meant being used to shape what comes next. As she returned to her room, she noticed something chilling. The messages had stopped. Not because the threat was gone, but because the next move wouldn't come with words. And somewhere inside the empire, someone was already preparing to collect the cost of her existence. Blood ruled this house. Not love. Not trust. Blood. She understood that now. Every corridor carried the weight of it. Every portrait on the walls, men with cold eyes and confident smiles, told the same story. Empires here weren't inherited with kindness. They were seized through survival. And she stood at the center of a legacy that was beginning to rot. The Underworld boss had gone quiet. Not absent, but distant. Meetings stretched late into the night. His children were summoned one by one, always separately, always behind closed doors. No voices raised. No arguments overheard. That silence was worse than violence. It meant decisions were being made. She began noticing things she hadn't before. The eldest son's guards doubled overnight. The second son stopped appearing at meals. The third grew reckless, too visible, too loud. And the youngest, twitched, always watched. One evening, the house elder found her in the library. "You should be careful," he said without preamble. "Of whom?" she asked. "Everyone," he replied. "Including him." That was the first time anyone had warned her about the man who owned the house. Later that night, she overheard fragments of conversation drifting through a partially open door. "The bloodline won't accept it. She has no claim. That's exactly why she's dangerous." Her chest tightened. That word followed her into sleep. The truth arrived the next morning, uninvited. She was summoned to the inner study, a room no one entered without purpose. The boss stood by the window, his back to her. "You've been told you're barren," he said suddenly. "Yes." He turned slowly. "Who told you that?" She hesitated. "Doctors. My family." "And you believed them?" "Yes." He studied her face carefully. Too carefully. "Interesting," he murmured. Her heart skipped. "What do you mean?" He didn't answer. Instead, he handed her a file. Inside were medical reports, different ones. Recent ones. Her hands began to shake as she read. "Normal. Healthy. No abnormalities." "No," she whispered. "You were never incapable," he said calmly. "You were inconvenient." The room felt smaller. "They lied to me," she said. "Yes." "Why?" He stepped closer. "Because a woman with no perceived value is easier to sell." The realization hit like a blade. Her curse had been manufactured. That night, the youngest confronted her again. "You've changed," he said. "So have you," she replied. He smiled thinly. "Do you know what blood does in this house?" She shook her head. "It excuses everything," he said. "Betrayal. Murder. War." "Then why am I here?" she asked. "Because," he leaned in, voice low, "you don't have blood to protect you." That same night, the second son disappeared. No announcement. No morning. Just absence. By morning, the house was sealed. Guards doubled. Phones confiscated. The boss called a family meeting. For the first time, all 5 of them stood together. The empire is under threat, the boss said evenly. From within. No one spoke. My son has gone missing, he continued. Until I know where loyalty stands, no one leaves this house. The eldest clenched his jaw. The third shifted uncomfortably. The youngest looked straight at her. She felt the accusation before it was spoken. Hours later, whispers spread. She had been seen near the east wing. She had been asking questions. She had motive. Fear turned sharp. That night, her door didn't lock. She noticed it just in time. Footsteps approached, slow, deliberate. She stood frozen as the handle turned. The door opened. The third son stepped inside. You're going to destroy us, he said quietly. I didn't do anything, she whispered. That's what makes you dangerous, he snapped. You exist. He moved closer. He's choosing you over us. No, she said. He's using me. The third laughed bitterly. There's no difference. A sound echoed in the hallway, guards approaching. The third stepped back. They won't kill you, he said. Not yet. He left. The next morning, blood was found near the docks. Not enough for certainty. Enough for fear. The boss stood beside her later that day. You see now, he said, voice heavy. Blood creates entitlement. And entitlement breeds betrayal. Did you plan this? She asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he said, legacy always demands sacrifice. She looked at him then, not as a savior, not as a monster, but as a man preparing for something irreversible. And who pays that price? She asked. He met her eyes. That, he said quietly, depends on who survives. That night, she realized the final truth of this empire. Family wasn't protection. It was the battlefield. And she was no longer just standing in the crossfire. She was becoming the reason it existed. By the 5th night, the house no longer pretended to be alive. It functioned. Lights turned on and off with purpose. Guards rotated in silence. Orders were given without voices being raised. Every person inside the estate moved like they already knew what was coming, but not when. Fear had matured into certainty. The missing son had not returned. No ransom. No message. No body. In this empire, absence was a verdict. She felt it most clearly in the way people looked at her now, not with suspicion alone, but with resignation. As if her presence confirmed something they had long feared. That the end would not come from outside. It would come from blood. The Underworld boss summoned her before dawn. The study was dim, curtains drawn. Only one lamp burned, casting shadows across his face, older now, heavier. Not weaker. Just closer to something final. You should leave, he said without greeting. Her heart skipped. Leave. For a few days, he continued. Until things settle. She understood the lie immediately. Things were not going to settle. You're preparing for something, she said. He didn't deny it. I built this empire to outlive me, he replied. But legacies don't survive comfort. They survive correction. She took a step closer. And what needs to be corrected? He looked at her then, not as a strategist, not as a ruler, but as a man who had already accepted the cost of his decisions. My children, he said quietly. And my mistake. Her breath caught. I'm your mistake? No, he replied. You're the consequence. The house erupted into motion an hour later. Meetings were cancelled. Routes were changed. Guards were armed openly now. Whatever secrecy once existed had expired. The eldest son confronted her in the west corridor. This ends tonight, he said, voice low. What ends? She asked. He glanced toward the study doors. The illusion that he can choose legacy over blood. You think I want this? She asked. I think, he said, stepping closer, that you don't understand what he's willing to burn to keep control. She did understand now. That evening, the youngest cornered her in the inner garden. You're still breathing, he said. That means the decision isn't finished. What decision? She asked. Who survives him? He answered. The words followed her long after he left. Night fell like a sentence. The boss called everyone together, children, elders, enforcers. The room was vast, but the silence made it feel narrow. One of my sons betrayed this family, he said evenly. And one of you knows where he is. No one spoke. Blood gives you rights, he continued. But it does not give you immunity. His eyes moved across his children, lingering just long enough on each to remind them of what he was capable of. Then, unexpectedly, he turned to her. This woman, he said, has no blood claim here. All eyes snapped to her. And yet, he continued, she has shown more loyalty to this house than some who were born into it. The tension was unbearable. This empire will survive, he said, but it will not carry weakness forward. A guard entered hurriedly, whispering into the boss's ear. The shift was immediate. It's time, the boss said. She didn't know what that meant, but everyone else did. She was escorted back to her room. This time, no guard stayed outside. That was worse. Minutes passed. Then footsteps. Not hurried. Not hidden. The door opened. The eldest son stood there, eyes dark. He chose you, he said flatly. I never asked him to, she replied. That doesn't matter, he said. Legacy doesn't care about consent. He stepped aside. Behind him, the youngest waited, calm, resolved. You were never meant to be the mother of anything, the youngest said softly. You were meant to be the measure. The measure of what? She asked. Of who he's willing to sacrifice, he replied. A gunshot echoed somewhere in the estate. Then another. Shouts followed. Orders. Chaos cracking the silence for the first time since she arrived. The youngest smiled faintly. It's begun. Before she could react, guards rushed past them, toward the docks. She ran. Not away. Toward the sound. By the water, she found the boss standing alone. Blood stained the stone near his feet. Someone lay just out of sight. You knew this would happen, she said, breathless. He didn't turn. Yes, he said. That's why I chose you. For what? She demanded. He finally faced her. To prove, he said quietly, that blood is not the same as legacy. Sirens wailed in the distance. Allies. Enemies. The world closing in. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. When this ends, he said, the empire will belong to whoever understands the cost. And what is the cost? She asked. He looked past her, toward his children, toward the future he had set on fire. Everything, he replied. Another gunshot rang out. She turned. And in that moment, before she could see who fell, before she could understand what choice had been made, the story stops. Because legacies are not born in answers. They are born in blood that hasn't dried yet. And the final price has not been paid.